the Holy Spirit says something that's good, you can say. If you don't know what to say, you can give me a little Christian moo. It sounds like this. Have you ever been offended by a child? Kind of ridiculous, isn't it? But kids say some pretty offensive things. We're in this season of life right now where our kids should be sleeping in their own rooms, but they don't. And because we have 4 of them, it's about a 2-hour rotation. Every 2 hours, somebody's knocking on our door, coming into our room. But for some reason, they've learned that the better person to go to is mom. So they wake up, they go in the room, and they go, hey, mommy, 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 mommy. The other day, Trinity, who's our 3rd oldest, our 4-year-old, she came in the room in the middle of the night, and she goes over to mom, and I could hear Kylie say to her, go to your dad. Which I was like, that's rude, I'm sleeping, you know? But Trinity comes over to the other side, and I don't have the energy to try to figure out what she needs. I just go, hey, bub, just get in the bed with me. And so she gets in the bed and sleeps next to me, and it's like the sweetest thing, you know? Like, it's a little annoying, it's kind of uncomfortable, but when you wake up and you just see them like laying right next to you, just precious, it's pretty awesome, you know? And so we sleep through the night, and I wake up in the morning, and I come down for breakfast, and I ask all of our girls, hey, Wesley, how'd you sleep last night? She was like, great, Dad. Zoe, how'd you sleep last night? Awesome. Lively, how'd you sleep last night? It was so great. Trinity, how'd you sleep last night? I slept terribly. Daddy, you snored all night long. Are you kidding me right now? You woke me up out of my sleep, came into my room, slept in my bed, and you have the audacity to complain about my snoring? Rude. I'm offended. Tell you what's more offensive than that, though, is what they've been doing to Kylie recently. It's pretty crazy. Kylie will get dressed for the day, like fully dressed, makeup done, hair done, outfit on, ready to walk out of the door, and they'll look at her and they'll go, Mama, is that what you're wearing today, or are those your PJs? I know! You're offended too, right? Like, who is raising these children? Y'all pray for us, right? It's funny, though, I was thinking about that, and I had this thought. Are my kids really that offensive, or am I just too easily offended? Like, is what they're saying that bad, or have I just become so sensitive that anything will offend me at any moment? And what's interesting is that the same question that I'm asking about my kids is the same question that we're wrestling with culturally right now, isn't it? Are people that offensive? Are we just so easily offended that it doesn't matter what they say, we're just going to find ourselves frustrated either way? Offense. Now, before we go any further, I've learned it's important when we're starting a series to define our terms. So when I say offense, here's what I mean. I mean a rude or disrespectful behavior or attack that causes anger, hurt, or upset. Offense. A rude or disrespectful behavior or attack that causes anger, hurt, or upset. And I don't know about y'all, but in 2026, I feel like we live in a culture of offense. Like, we're constantly walking on eggshells, trying not to offend the people around us, trying to be politically correct, trying to avoid offending people. Anyone else in the room can relate to me. Y'all gonna help me at 11 a.m. Can y'all relate to what I'm saying right now? We live in this culture of offense. But it feels like no matter what you do or what you say or how you say it or how much you think about it, the person's gonna be offended anyway. And so what happens for you and for me is because we are so tired of walking on eggshells and trying not to be offensive, we take the opposite approach and we're like, you know what? Fine, if you're going to be offended anyway, I'm just going to say it. I'm going to post it. I'm going to say it. I'm going to tweet it. I'm going to put it on Facebook. I'm going to put it on Instagram. I'm going to say it at the dinner table. I'm going to say it at Thanksgiving. I don't care if your feelings are hurt. I'm just going to say what it is because you're going to be offended anyway, so I'll just be offensive. But the problem is that when we're offended, someone else becomes offensive. And when they become offensive, we get offended. And then they're offended that we're offended, and now you're offended that they're offended, and so the only solution is to block them, cancel them, or remove them from your life, which creates, you know what it creates more of? Offense. And for some of you, this is the story that you're living with a family member, with a friend, that started with one little comment where you were offended or they were offended, and you were offended at their offense, and now the person that used to be close to you is far from you. Now they're out of your life. And we live in this culture where we're constantly dealing with offense. You know what's interesting, though? Is that while we're dealing with our own offenses, there is a third party who's being offended. And it's God. You ever thought about that? You ever thought about that God actually cares about the way that we treat each other? You ever thought about the fact that God might be offended by our offenses? You ever thought about the fact that you might be doing something or saying something or responding in a way or treating someone in a way that is actually offensive to God? It's kind of wild to me that in our attempt to deal with our own offenses with each other, that we actually live in a way that's offensive to God. And for most of us, we don't even notice it. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be in a series called No Offense. We're going to be talking about these 3 ideas: how to avoid offense, how to address offense, and how to recover from an offense. Why don't you turn to your neighbor and say, no offense? Now turn to the other neighbor, the one you neglected, and say, none taken. None taken. We are going to be in Matthew chapter 18 for the next 3 weeks, and Jesus is actually going to talk about these 3 topics. How do we avoid offense? How do we deal with an offense? And how do we respond when we are offended? So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 18. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 9. If you don't have a physical Bible with you, by the way, you can grab one from the table in the back of the room. We also have a Matthew book that we put together. We're tracking through the book of Matthew together all year, and you can grab one of those, and it'll have sermon notes for you and some devotional time in there for you as well. Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 1, says this. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" This question sound familiar to anyone in the room? It's like one of the disciples' favorite questions to ask Jesus. Like, who's going to be great in the kingdom? Who's going to be the most important? Who's going to be the most significant? Like, you've come as the Messiah to establish an earthly kingdom, and if you're going to lead the kingdom and we're part of your 12, we're in your inner circle, that means we're going to be important in the kingdom, right? So who's going to be the greatest? And they keep asking this question over and over again, waiting for Jesus to eventually be like, all right, fine, you guys keep asking. Let me just tell you, Peter, it's John. I'm sorry. Your feelings are hurt, but he's the beloved, even though he gave himself that nickname. It's him, you know? But Jesus never answers their question. He always takes that opportunity to teach his disciples something about what the kingdom is really about. And he goes, you're concerned with status, you're concerned with position, you're concerned with significance. You're concerned of what your seat is going to be in the kingdom, but he's going to flip the conversation to a moment to teach them what the kingdom is really about. Now, before we're too hard on the disciples, can we just be honest in the room? We're asking similar questions, aren't we? Like, God, how do I know when I'm successful enough? I just want to be respected. How do I know that I have significance or importance? Like, how will I make sure that I don't go unnoticed, that I matter in this life? Like, how can I be great? How can my life count for something? And what Jesus is going to show us is that the answer is not status. The answer is not position. The answer is not accomplishing something. It's actually something completely different. And he gives us an object lesson to show us. It says this. He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. He said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children. I'm just going to pause here real quick. This is not in my notes, but I think it's worth saying. Jesus says, like children, meaning he wants you to be childlike, not childish. And for some of us in the room, we've settled for a childish faith. We got a faith that was handed on to us by our parents, and we show up at church and we sing the songs and we let someone tell us about Jesus, but we've never actually grown and matured into a personal relationship with Jesus for ourselves. And Jesus is not going to let you settle for a childish faith. You have to have a childlike faith, but there's some responsibility for you to grow in your faith as well. He says, so become like a child, but don't be childish, or you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. He says, hey, just to be really clear, you're worried about being great. I want to tell you how you can even get in. The only way in is to become childlike. Therefore, whoever takes this lowly position of the child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name also welcomes me. Jesus responds to the question with an object lesson. And he brings the child into their midst, and he goes, if you want to understand what it's like to get into the kingdom of heaven, if you want to understand what it's like to have access to God, if you want to understand what it's like to have significance and importance and to be great, it's not about your status, it's not about your performance. It's not about your accomplishments. It's not about what you can do in this life. He goes, you want to understand the kingdom of heaven, you have to understand that it's a relationship. And the relationship is that of a father and their child. He goes, this is the picture. So if this is the relationship that matters to Jesus, if this is the relationship that Jesus calls us to, is this father-child relationship, the question then is, what should that relationship look like? So y'all help me out a little bit. Like, what does a relationship look like with a father and their child? Help me. Yell it out. Say it again. Loving. Yes, great. Come on. Protective. Dependent. Good. Selfless. Selfless, not selfish. Trust. Good. What about from the kid to the parent? How does the kid interact with their parent? Yeah, there's respect. It's great. What else? There's access. It's great. Fellowship. So good. There's a receiving. Come on. Anyone, any dads in the room remember when your kids looked at you like you could never do anything wrong? You were like a superhero to them. And then they got to middle school and high school and you couldn't do anything right, you know? But there's also this like awe. Yeah, there's a patience from the parent. And so you look at this relationship with a father and a child, and there are some ways that it should be defined. There's some ways that this relationship should work itself out, that the child looks at the parent with awe and respect and trust, and there's like this dependency that they have on their parent. But then the father shows up with love and protection and patience and selflessness, and there's this fellowship, there's this relationship, this intimacy that's formed between the two. And Jesus goes, hey, if you want to understand how to be great in the kingdom, it starts with understanding this relationship, this father-child relationship. It's interesting that the longer I've had kids, the more that I've started to understand this relationship between me and God. Because watching my little girls grow up and having moments where I get to protect them and care for them and show up for them, it helps me to understand the type of relationship that God wants with me. Trinity's not my favorite kid, I promise, but she's really cute, so I talk about her a lot. This is her right here, so good. But there was a season where I was trying to help Trinity learn to sleep in a room, and she wouldn't do it, and so don't judge me. We flipped the locks, and we put the lock on the other side so she couldn't get out, you know? And I would send her to bed, and there was this one night that I sent her to bed, and I locked the door, and she started crying. And I was like, I'm not giving in. I'm not caving. You can do this, Gerald. You got it. And then she said this phrase, I'll never forget it. She goes, Daddy, help me. And I broke. I was like, I know you just manipulated me, but I don't care. Because if my little girl needs my help, hear me, there's nothing that's going to stand in the way of me showing up. I will not let anything or anyone get in the way of the relationship that I intend to have with my daughter. I need you to hear me when I say this. You cannot understand anything that Jesus is going to say next until you understand the basis of this relationship. You cannot understand the hard words that are coming from Jesus until you understand how important this relationship is that he has with his children. You cannot understand what Jesus is going to say next until you understand how much he wants to protect you, love you, care for you, show up for you, how much he wants the best for you. Until you understand that God loves you like his own child, you will not understand what Jesus is going to say next. And what he's going to say next is going to be hard for a lot of us to hear. And so if you're going to hear it rightly, it starts by first understanding this relationship, that you come to him as a child who has a loving father who will do anything that he can to protect you. And he goes on to explain that in the next verse. This is what he says, verse 6. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Okay, in rap music, there's a phrase called a double entendre. This is random, but just go with me for a second, okay? A double entendre is when a phrase has two meanings at the same time. This is not an endorsement of Lil Wayne, but this is a good example, okay? Lil Wayne has a line in a rap song from my BC days before I knew the Lord that says, real G's move in silence like lasagna. It's a double entendre, because the G in lasagna is silent, but a real G, gangster, moves in silence so people don't know what he's doing. Are y'all tracking with me? It's a double entendre. Okay, what Jesus does here is actually a double entendre. He brings a child into their mix, and then he's going to make a statement that applies both to the child and also to believers. He says, if any one of you causes one of these little ones to stumble, literal sense, a child, it's better for you to drown in the sea. Hear me, that God cares about the protection of children, and because we are his followers, we will as well. That we will not let children be abused or hurt or mistreated or neglected, because God actually cares about children, and he says when you mistreat a child, it's one of the worst things you could do. And, equivalent, when you mistreat one of, watch this, my children, I have that same level of anger, hurt, frustration, and I'm going to deal with that too. So the same way that you feel when you hear about a child who's been trafficked, when you hear about a child who's been mistreated, when you hear about a child who's been abused, when you hear about a child who's been abandoned, Jesus says, that's the way I feel about you. That same hurt that you feel for them is the hurt that I feel for you. That same rage that you feel for them is the same rage I feel for you. It is worse for you to have a millstone thrown in your neck than to come after one of, or put around your neck and thrown into the sea than to come after one of mine. Now, this imagery is hard for us to understand because we don't live in the first century, but this millstone would have been a massive stone, like the size of a boulder, that a donkey would have pulled in order to grain mill. And there would have been a large hole in the middle of this millstone, large enough for a human to put their head through. So literally he's going, take a massive boulder, put it around your neck, throw yourself off into the sea. This is a harsh judgment from Jesus. These are heavy words. Not only that, drowning was one of the worst ways you could die in the ancient world. So this would have been terrifying for people to hear. And in addition to this wouldn't have just been like terrible in a hypothetical sense. They would have understood this literally, because Tiberius, who was the emperor of Rome at this time, was known as one of the most sadistic emperors in Roman history. And he literally took himself to an island, and for entertainment, he would bring people and throw them off a cliff to die. And Jesus goes, that's the fate for anyone who harms one of mine. This is a harsh response. But can I ask you, why do you think Jesus is so angry? Like, why such a severe warning? Why does he feel such deep emotion about this? Could I suggest to you that maybe it's because when he looks at you, he doesn't just see a person, he sees his child. And anything or anyone that causes God's children to stumble in sin is deeply offensive to God. He goes, if it hurts you, it makes me angry. If it hurts my kids, I'm going to do something about it. And I'm going to deal with it. But not only will I deal with it, I'm going to deal with it aggressively. Friends, this is why God hates sin so much. Because sin is the primary tool that the enemy uses to hurt God's kids. Y'all realize, like, there's no dualism between God and the enemy, right? Y'all understand that? Like, sometimes we talk about the enemy like he has the same power and equivalency to God. But you know they're not equal. No, I'm not talking to myself. I'm talking to y'all. Y'all know they're not equal, right? Yeah. So the enemy cannot win a war or a battle with God. He can't get even with him. The only way for him to hurt the heart of God is to do what? Hurt his kids. So if you go back to the garden, now the story makes so much more sense. The enemy can't do anything to God, so what's the next best thing he can do? Go after Adam and Eve to hurt his heart. Get them to stumble into sin. And so Adam and Eve do, and what it does is it causes this separation between them and God. It causes them to feel shame. They're hiding and covering up from a God that they used to walk with daily. that they're filled with doubt and insecurity, that there's this pain that they have to deal with, that there's a conflict now between husband and wife, and it eventually leads to this husband and wife having kids and having to mourn the loss of one of their sons by the hands of their other son. This is what sin does to us, and God hates it. He hates the impact that sin has on our life, and so he says, I will deal with this aggressively. It's better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and thrown into the sea than to cause one of my kids to stumble in sin. You hurt one of mine, we're going to have a problem. He continues on, and he's going to give us 3 categories of sin that he's going to deal with aggressively. The first one is this. He says, woe to the world. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble or sin. Such things must come, meaning that the world is fallen and broken, and so there's really no way around it. But he's still angry about it. He's still frustrated with it because it hurts his kids. And then he goes on to say this, and woe to the person through whom they come. So the first woe that he gives us, that word woe means a harsh judgment, a severe punishment. He goes, woe or punishment or judgment to the world. The first judgment he gives us is to a culture of sin, to a culture that makes it easy for us to fall into temptation, for a culture that's pulling us in the opposite direction of the hopes and the dreams that God has for us. Woe to the culture that objectifies women as objects. Woe to the culture of where wild living is celebrated. Woe to a culture that infidelity is tolerated. Woe to a culture where kids are treated as optional. Woe to a culture where the bottom line is more important than the person that's in front of you. Woe to a culture that is built on drugs and alcohol and sex and porn. He goes, woe to that culture. Woe to a world that's going to build a system that is easy for you to fall into sin. Woe to the policies, woe to the programs, woe to the companies, woe to the organizations that create environments where my kids get hurt. And I don't know about y'all, but I look at TV and I turn on the news and I walk into different environments and I look all around me and I feel like we're living in a culture that Jesus is going, woe to that. That's not what I want for my kids. That's not the way it's supposed to be. Because here's what we don't realize about our culture. Like, everything looks good on the surface, but there's actually a system by which our culture works, and this is what it does. The world will seduce you to the line, and then it'll shame you as soon as you cross it. Hey, you're having a hard day. It's okay. Take the edge off with a drink until you become an alcoholic. Now, how could you? Oh, come on. Like, everybody watches that. It's okay for you to go there. It's okay for you to look at that website until you are cheating on your wife. Now it's a problem that you've developed this mentality about women. Oh, yeah, we're going to celebrate you, and we're going to incentivize you, and we're going to honor you if you work more hours than you should until you're a deadbeat parent, and now we're judging you for it. That the world will seduce you to the line, but then as soon as you step into the thing that it's been attracting you to, it brings you shame and guilt and regret and pain, and Jesus goes, woe to that world. I'm not okay with a world that is going to lead my children to sin and is going to hurt them in the process. Woe to the world. But then he goes on to say, not just the world, but woe to the person through whom they come. He attacks the culture of sin, but then he also deals with these agents of sin. These agents of sin, these people who show up in your story and who bring sin into your life and your story, who bring unnecessary pain and heartache, who do things that are going to hurt you, and they know what they're doing when they do. For me, that story took place in the 3rd grade. I didn't realize it until late into my early 30s, actually in my early 30s, I was going to say late 20s, but it was my early 30s that I realized it, that an 8th grade girl who I'd grown close with took advantage of me in a way that I did not understand was her taking advantage of me. Until I had kids of my own and I realized that if an 8th grade boy was ever with my 3rd grade daughter, I would kill him. This person brought sin into my world. And that sin has had implications for the way that I've lived from 3rd grade all the way up until 36. Thought processes, patterns, behaviors, things that I wrestle with, anger, frustration, pain, stuff that I didn't even know was there until I sat down with a counselor. And Jesus says, hey, woe to the person who does that to you. Like, I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to judge that. That's my story. Everyone has a story in the room. I don't know what it is for you. Maybe it's words that were spoken over you. Maybe it was a culture that you lived in at in your home, where you had to manage around an alcoholic parent. Maybe it was substances, maybe there was physical abuse, maybe there was emotional abuse. I don't know what the story is for you, but we have people who show up in our life and introduce sin, and it impacts us in ways that it is still impacting us today for many of us. Because the reality is this, is for all of us in the room, no matter what your story is, sin was inflicted on you before you ever acted in it. And if it wasn't a story that took place in your life, can I just tell you it started with Adam? That original sin is a part of your story, that sin was inflicted on you before you ever acted in it. And God goes, I hate that. I hate that you're having to deal with things that you didn't do to yourself. I hate that there's people who have brought pain and heartache into your story. It's not supposed to be that way. And so can I just say to you that I don't know what happened to you. I don't know what your story is. I don't know what your background is, but God hates that it did, and he hates the impact that it's had on you, and he has promised to make it right. Now, the beautiful thing about our God is he doesn't leave us with broken stories, that when we come to him, he reconciles them and redeems them, and he actually uses those stories to bring hope to other people. Because hear me, the enemy never wins. Jesus always does. But the reality is there will be a day that God deals harshly with that sin, with those people who inflicted sin on you. Now, I also need to say this in love. And I don't want to diminish your story in any way by saying this, but I need to say it with clarity and with love and boldness. Jesus doesn't stop there so you don't get to either. I know we live in a culture that makes it easy for you to sin, but Jesus goes, that's not an excuse. I know that there are things that have happened in our life that cause us to perpetuate sin in our story. He goes, but that doesn't have to be the case. He goes on to go, hey, like there is a culture of sin that we have to deal with, and there are agents of sin that we have to deal with, but there's also a personal responsibility that you have to deal with as well. Look at what he says next. He says, if your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed and crippled than for you to have 2 hands and 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. If your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. So Jesus goes, hey, I'm going to deal aggressively with a culture of sin and with agents of sin who have brought sin into your life and who have made it easy for you to stumble. And as my children, you want to know one of the other interesting things about the relationship between a child and their parent? Is that children imitate their parents too. And so Jesus goes, you know what I've said about how I'm going to deal with the sin of this world. Now imitate me and deal with your own sin in that same way. I'm going to deal aggressively with the sin that's been brought to you, but you have to deal aggressively with the sin that you've brought on yourself. He calls his children to imitate him and deal with their personal sin. To deal with the stuff that you're doing that no one else knows that you're doing. To deal with the stuff that's going on inside of you that no one else knows is going on inside with you. To deal with the habits and the behaviors that have the potential to kill, steal, and destroy all that God has for you, for your family, for your kids, for your life. Jesus says, hey, I'm going to deal aggressively with sin, so you have to as well. I'll say it this way. Deal aggressively with your sin, or your sin will deal aggressively with you. If you don't kill it, it will kill you. He says you cannot point the finger at the system. You cannot blame the people around you. There is some sin in your life that you just have to take responsibility for. You have to deal with it, and you need to deal with it aggressively. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. What does he mean? The hand and the foot are supposed to be symbolic of behavioral sins. It's the places you go, and it's the things that you do that you know you should not do. It's the substance you run to. It's the website you know you should stay off. It's the cabinet you know you need to empty. It's the clubs that you've been going to. It's the cards and stuff that you've been messing around with. It's the affair that you keep running back to. He goes, all of that stuff, cut it off. Because if you don't kill it, it is going to hurt you and it will hurt the people around you. And here's the problem: when you don't cut off your personal sin, it impacts the people around you, and now you put yourself in the category of being an agent of sin to somebody else. He goes, deal with your sin aggressively. Because if you don't, it will deal with you. He says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. In the Jewish culture, the eye was said to be a window into the soul or gateway into the soul. So Jesus says your hand and your foot. He's talking about your behaviors, your outward sin. But when he talks about your eye, he goes, what's the stuff that's going on the inside of you? What's the stuff that you've allowed in? What's the stuff that's happening in here that maybe no one else can see, but it's hurting you and it's hurting the people around you? Like your pride and your selfishness and your jealousy and your control and your anger and your bitterness and your unforgiveness. He goes, all of that stuff, you got to cut it off too. Because if you let pride grow, it's going to hurt you. If you let that selfishness grow, it's going to hurt the people around you. If you keep being jealous, if you keep trying to control, if you let anger build up or bitterness build up or unforgiveness build up, it is going to hurt you and the people around you. He goes, you got to cut it off. And the implication of what Jesus is saying when he says, cut off your hand and cut off your foot and gouge out your eye are two things. Number one, that it will be painful. That saying no to sin is not easy. It's a fight. It's a battle. And it's going to cost you something. It will be painful. And number two, it will be noticeable. Could I just submit this to you this morning? If you have sin in your life that you think you've cut off but no one else notices, you may not have actually cut it off. You think you've dealt with your pride but no one else has noticed, you might still be prideful. You think you've dealt with your lust but no one else notices? There's no accountability in your life. There's no one that you're talking to about it. Have you really cut it off? Or have you just used willpower for a season and it looks good, but it's going to come back twice as hard? Deal aggressively with your sin, or it will deal aggressively with you. For some of you, that might be blocking a number in your phone that you know needs to be blocked. For some of you, there's some people you're hanging out with that you got to stop hanging out with because they're pulling you away from Jesus. For some of you, it's deleting social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, off of your phone because you know that you have a tendency to scroll and then you stop and you linger for too long. For some of you, it's turning over financial control to your spouse because your spending is out of control. For some of you, it's a recovery group that you know you need to get into so that you can get help. For some of you, it's telling your spouse the truth that you've been hiding for a long time. For some of you, it's walking away from a promotion because you know it's going to cost you your integrity. I'm just telling y'all, real repentance is usually visible, and if no one can see that you changed, you probably haven't changed as much as you think. Jesus says, deal aggressively with your sin, or it will deal aggressively with you. It will be painful, and it will be noticeable. You ever have a moment where you make a joke and nobody laughs, and you're like, I think I might have just offended you. Well, I was a student pastor. I was a senior in high school, and I'd been a small group leader since his freshman year. I took him to Zaxby's, sitting down, catching up. We hadn't seen each other in a little while. And we sit at the table, and he pulls out a flip phone and puts it on the table. And I immediately start roasting him. I'm like, oh, bro, you broke another phone. Like, he had a tendency to break phones and lose phones and drop them in pools. And, I just start roasting him, making jokes. And he doesn't laugh at all. He just looks me dead in my face until I finish. And he goes, yeah, man, I didn't lose my phone. I didn't break it. I actually gave it to my mom. Because I just kept finding myself on sites that I didn't want to end up on. And I figured it would be better to be made fun of by my friends for having a flip phone than to keep falling into that sin. I figured it'd be better to not get to keep up with everyone on Instagram than to let Instagram lead me to a place that I know I shouldn't be. I just figured it'd be better to figure out how to watch videos on a computer in a public space in my house than it would be to bring the temptation of the world into my bedroom every night. So I gave my mom my iPhone and I asked for a flip phone instead. He goes, you're not the first person to make a joke about it, but I'd rather the pain of being made fun of than the pain of sinning in a way that hurts God and hurts me. If a senior in high school can deal aggressively with his sin, what's your excuse? If a senior in high school can risk being ostracized socially, what's your excuse? If a senior in high school can realize the impact of his sin on his own life, what's your excuse when you have family and a spouse? Career, you have so much to lose. If a senior in high school could get it, what's our excuse. Jesus says to deal aggressively with our sin, but here's the reason that he can say this with such boldness and so confidence. It's one of the things I love about Jesus. He has never asked us to do something that he was unwilling to do for us first. Hear me. The same God who tells us to deal aggressively with sin is the same God who is willing to die to set us free from it. Like, really think about this for a minute. That Jesus says that sin is so serious it deserves judgment. He says that sin is so destructive that it has to be cut off. He says that sin is so dangerous that it could ruin your life. And yet that same Jesus would go to a cross and die for our sin. Why? Because God was not in the business of just telling us to fix ourselves. God was in the business of warning us about our sin and then doing something to set us free from our sin. So he died the most excruciating death in all of human history. He let Rome aggressively beat him within inches of his life. He let Rome aggressively nail him to a cross. He let Rome aggressively spit and mock on him. He dealt aggressively with your sin in order that you might be free from it once and for all. Because at the cross, he took the punishment for your sin and mine. At the cross, he took the shame that was created by our sin. At the cross, the separation that we created was bridged by him. And 3 days later, he rose from a grave victorious and said, you no longer have to be mastered by sin anymore. Hear me, I want to be so clear. He doesn't say you won't struggle. He just says it's not your identity. It doesn't control you. It doesn't master you. Hear me, the shackles are off and the gloves are off. You can fight back. And you're not fighting in your own strength. You're fighting by the power of the Spirit, and you're fighting from a place of victory. Jesus says, I have come so that you might be set free, so that you can fight against the schemes of the enemy, so that you don't fall into sin, so that you can live the abundant life that I have come to offer you. You no longer are mastered by it. You are free to fight. He dealt aggressively with sin, so that you could deal aggressively with your sin as well. But can I just ask you a couple of questions? What sin do you need to confess to somebody today? Not tomorrow, not later this week, like today. What app do you need to delete right now? Who do you need to apologize to before the sun goes down? What cabinet do you need to clear out? What sin do you need to cut off? Because friends, please hear me. This is not a message of judgment from Jesus. This is a good father who protects his kids. And he will not settle for anything that hurts you or that keeps you from him. Oftentimes when we hear a message like this, we think the voice of God sounds like, stop! Cut it out! It's not good for you. But I think the voice of God sounds a whole lot more like this. Hey, bud, I know you got knocked down. You can get back up. Hey, I know you've been struggling with this for 20 years, but today's the day that ends. Hey, I know you feel like you got no fight in you. I'll fight with you. Hey, I know you're tired of hiding. Come on, you can come into the light. I know it's scary. I know you're afraid of what they think, but no matter what they say, I'm still with you. I think the voice of God sounds a lot less like, stop! And it sounds a lot more like, start. Why don't you start living today? Why don't you start experiencing freedom today? Why don't you start living with hope today? Why don't you start living with peace today? Why don't you start living with purpose today? Why don't you start living like my child today? I've come to set you free. So Jesus, thank you that you love us enough, that you did not leave us to deal with our sin on our own, but that you came and lived the life that we could not live. You died the death that we deserve, and you rose again so that we never have to fight sin on our own. You took away its power. You took away its consequence. And you now leave us with you to fight for who you've called us to be in the life that you have for us. Thank you that you will judge the sin of this world. Thank you that you will deal with those who have hurt us. But thank you that you've given us agency as your children to imitate you and fight our sin as well. Would you help us to do that from a place of strength and victory, knowing that you're with us? For the one who needs to confess, would you give him courage right now? For the one who needs to clear out a cabinet, would you give them strength? For the one who's been living in secret, would you invite them into the light? Would you give us purpose? Would you help us?